Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to On the Other Side, Leadership After Transition. Season 2 officially begins tonight, and I'm more excited than I've been in a long time to get back on the microphone, to get in front of you and actually have a conversation. This will be the first time that we've streamed live for the podcast, so I'll strip the audio and still put it on iTunes to be listened to as you drive to work or wherever you like to listen to it. But I'm excited because for the first episode, I have someone I've been cyber stalking, I would say, for about 8 months. And we got a chance to talk back in the August time frame. And I finally got an opportunity to get him on the show. And I'm excited to bring him on. So let's start by bringing him on the show. Here we go. And you're not on yet. There he is, Lloyd Knight. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Outstanding. So up in Atlanta. So I'm down in Tampa, Florida, loving the sun. It's been warm for the last couple weeks. I mean, we had a couple cold days. I think it was 55 once. How's the weather in Atlanta today?
Raining. So it's been raining for like the last 3-4 weeks. So I haven't been home in Atlanta a lot here lately, but it's supposed to warm up this weekend. Looking forward to it.
Well, good. I tell you, I walk outside. So I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, and I'll get folks on that, like my brother will say around December, hey, you should come up here. And I say, hey, I take a picture on my door. I have some palm trees. And I said, I'm good. I'm good right here. Buffalo's nice and all, but yeah, I'm staying put. But good. So tell us a little bit about who Lloyd Knight is. So you're born and raised and where, and take us through the trip into the military career.
Yeah, we'll do. So I'm an Army brat. So I was born in Fort Benning, Georgia. So my dad spent 20 years in the Army. He was a mess sergeant for most of his time. So I've lived everywhere. They spent half of my life in Germany, and I graduated high school outside of Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I joined the Kentucky Air National Guard when I was 17, still in high school. I started off as a F-4 Phantom crew chief. And I worked the flight line for about 6-8 months and quickly decided I didn't want to do that. And I joined the Air Force and became a aircraft loadmaster. And I spent almost my entire 20-year career as a loadmaster. I flew C-141s, Starlifters for most of my career. Started off in Charleston, flying them operationally. And then I was lucky enough as an E4, brand new E4, to get selected for flight test. And then I went to Wright-Patterson, Ohio. And then I was there for a little less than 3 years. And they moved my entire wing out to the Mojave Desert to Edwards, California. And while in flight tests, I got to fly a little bit of everything. So I flew 141 B models, A models, C5s. Flew C-23s, actually went to Army Flight Engineer School to learn how to fly C-23 Sherpas, and had a great assignment in flight test. And then my next assignment after that, I got reblued. I stepped out of the airplane and went to the TALC, which is basically a deployment coordinating unit, and I went to Ramstein, Germany. And I always say my wife loved Ramstein because she was there for 4 years. I was there for about 75 days a year because I deployed all over the Middle East and all over Europe and all over Africa. It was a wonderful assignment because I got to see that cargo in the back of the airplane was actually impacting people's lives. And awesome. So most loadmasters don't normally, see that. The load gets off is the most important thing, right? Just get it off. And so that was cool. While I was there, I taught load planning, and taught the affiliation training, and wonderful. Get to teach a lot of Army units, some foreign units, and then my next assignment was in Scott Air Force Base. I spent 18 months in the Taker TACC. And from then I moved up to the staff, and I spent 18 months on the staff as a functional manager. And from there, I got the first sergeant bug, and volunteered to be a first sergeant. Was the first enlisted crew member allowed to do first sergeant duty in probably over a decade. And I kind of set the pace to do that. And I started off as basically assisting the first sergeant of the headquarters unit, which was not that hard. It was 1,800 people, but I had more I had more full bird colonels than I did airmen. So but then I moved to the hospital and was a acting first sergeant for the hospital for about 4 months, which was a big challenge because I had 2 separate squadrons. I was dealing with a different kind of leadership and followership mentality than I'd ever seen out in aviation. And then I had 2 squadrons with very different squadron commanders. One was a brain surgeon and one was a former Army nurse. And I had to learn on how to put on a different hat for each of them. And that really improved my kind of leadership. It changed my perspective and definitely improved my my leadership abilities. And then from there, I moved to Seymour Johnson in Goldsboro, North Carolina. It was a communications squadron first sergeant. And so I spent 17 years as a loadmaster, got a little over 3,000 flight hours. And then it traveled all over the world. My last count was like 65 countries.
Wow.
And then but probably my favorite 3 years and probably the most learning occurred in my last 3 years as a first sergeant. And I can tell you, I use those last 3 years, the skills and experience I learned more today than I do my 4 college degrees or the 17 years I had in logistics and transportation.
Wow. And it's funny as you talk about first sergeant in the Air Force, a little bit different than first sergeant in the Army, but the one thing that made me, I can agree with or understand a lot, and that I think a lot of folks outside of the military don't understand. There's a culture, even within the Air Force. If you're an aviator within the Air Force and you leave the aviation realm and you go into a hospital, or if you go into, and that's the same with the Army. I'm a signal guy. I go into the hospital, or if I go into an aviation unit, or if I go into the infantry areas. Culture changes even within the organizations that we're in, right? And that's that I could understand how you could take that outside of the Air Force when you leave, and understanding have to put on different hats and change and be a little bit flexible of how you're leading when you're going from group to group or person to person. It's pretty interesting. It's a great experience. I'm glad you're able to, that's great that you even said that was where you learned the most. I think it's pretty interesting. So let me ask you a question real quick.
Sure.
C-141s. Now you did a lot of stuff, and you mentioned some aircraft, right? So you're talking about being a load master. How many airborne operations with Army paratroopers did you do?
So, quite a few in just in my first 3 years. One of my favorite missions was to go down to Fort Benning and do the airborne school.
Yeah.
So that was fun. It wasn't too hard of work on our side. You just open up the doors and watch them all jump out. And I think the funniest thing out of all that is my oldest son became a paratrooper.
Outstanding. Good for him. There you go. See, I jumped for 20 years the whole time. I loved it. But it's fun. An airborne school, the guy's eyes were like this. The young kids' eyes are big as all can be, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Outstanding. That's a great career. The C-141s aren't around anymore, I don't think. I think they took them out of inventory I don't want to say not too long ago, but probably about 10 years now.
It's been a while. So I got to see my airplane, retire, and got to see most of them get cut up and used for scrap metal. And there was probably about a dozen left, and it's always weird. In my job, I run government operations for UPS on the global freight forwarding side of the house, so I get to visit a lot of military bases, and it always feels pretty weird to drive onto an Air Force base and to see my plane on a pole at the front gate.
Man, that's awesome. So I like the C-141. I like the 141. Much more than I got to tell you than I like the 130. I'm not a fan. We used it an awful lot, but in the Sherpa, look, did you ever do any airborne operations out of a Sherpa before?
The only thing I dropped out, I dropped the Air Force Academy, the Wings of Blue team a couple times, and I would, believe it or not, I would drop streamers all the time for the Air Force Flight Test Pilot School, but not a whole lot. I couldn't see that that plane being very effectively used for paratroopers.
Well, we used them, and I'll tell you, so because we haven't met in person, I'm 6'1", right? So I'll tell you, that in the back of a Sherpa, there's no 6'1" person standing straight up. So you're hunched over and you're kind of moving yourself on out the door. It's kind of rough, but nah, great aircraft though. They don't use that anymore either. It is what it is. So you spent your time in the Air Force. You did a lot of great things. I think it's awesome, and I'd love to have more conversations because I'm sure the experiences in the aircraft are always fun, especially when you're training new guys as they're coming on. I mean, we had a good opportunity being in the back of aircraft an awful lot to see the new load masters come and the senior load masters that are helping them out. It's just an interesting dynamic, and I enjoyed it. I'd have to tell them sometimes, hey, relax, it's okay, especially when I had to open the door to give it to the Army, but they're doing the same thing we're about to do, and they weren't always excited, but the senior guy would always take them by his under his wing and help him out, or her wing, because load masters both, right, male and female, which is awesome. So now your career's winding down, you're getting ready to retire, and you're getting ready to go through the transition process. So what was that like for you? I mean, as you decide to go, which are you excited? Is the plan laid out in front of you, and you're just going to exit your uniform and then become rich and famous and everything in the world that you ever so desired? Is that how it went, or what was the story like?
It was interesting. I joined the Air Force right out of high school because one, I was a terrible high school student. I was too interested in sports and girls, and thought I would waste my parents' money. And honestly, I got out of high school with D's. And when I became a loadmaster, it kind of changed my study habits. Being a loadmaster is tough. Especially when I came in '87, they had about a 55% washout rate. Wow. And so you had to study, and you had to study hard. And as you mentioned earlier, it's continuously learning, right? You're always learning as a loadmaster, and it's pretty challenging. But even with all that learning and becoming a pretty good student of the airframe and of the career field, I still had no interest in going to college. I just didn't see it. It's at that point in time, I still didn't think I was smart enough, and which is really funny. And then about year 10 in the Air Force, I kind of woke up and said, well, there's a couple things. One, I'm pretty smart. So I'm smarter, or smarter than a lot of people around me. And I have the ability to learn. And then I'm going to eventually need college. I'm, flying, just like being a paratrooper, wears you out, right? It wears you down. And I eventually said, well, I need to, take care of myself and my family for after the military. And I started going to school and got 2 associate's degrees through the Community College of the Air Force, one in aircrew operations, one in human resources. Then I got a bachelor's in logistics and transportation management. And then shortly after I left the Air Force, I completed my master's degree in the transportation and logistics management. So I figured that piece out, luckily, well before I transitioned. And those degrees have gone on to have done well by them, right? I would have struggled trying to do those degrees after I left the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And then I was pretty good in the Air Force. I became a first sergeant. I tested for E8 twice. The second time I tested, I missed it by less than a point. So but I got to go to the Senior NCO Academy as a non-select, which at the time was very few people did. Yep. And I was the number 2 non-select to attend. So that means a couple things. That means I barely missed it. And then but I was pretty good at it. And I went to the Senior NCO Academy, doing well and thinking I was going to be in the Air Force for another 6, 8 years. And something funny happened. So I got down there and I started thinking about, wow, I have a lot to offer outside of the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And I was right at the 19-year mark. And I was getting ready they only let me do 1 3-year tour as a first sergeant. Okay. So I was ending that 3-year tour. So I was facing a year-long deployment at the time. And then I was going to have to go back in an airframe. And as you mentioned, my airframes were gone, right? So I was going to have to go to school again. And then basically fly the line for the first year, which means I was going to be away from home for 2 years. And then I was facing at least 2 more moves. My oldest son that became a paratrooper moved 6 times, went to 3 different high schools. And, I thought, maybe if I retire, that my youngest son, that he's not going to have to go to 3 different high schools. And, I thought a lot about it, and I decided to fully commit. So I put my retirement paperwork in at 19 years and 1 week. And in the Air Force, once you put your retirement work, you're pretty much committed. You can't test for promotion again. And at the time, I don't know how it is now, but you couldn't really withdraw that paperwork. Yeah. And so what that did is that gave me a full year to figure it out. And and that full year, I did figure it out. I did have a lot of help. I had the Air Force Family Transition and Readiness Center, and they had the TAP class at the time, which is much better now than it was. Yeah. And then I just went out and found resources, and I was a big fan of GI Jobs magazine. Yeah. And I thought they gave some great hints. Or great advice. My first resumes were terrible, absolutely terrible. I was the jerk who was writing a 7-page resume, right? Right. And I thought it was pretty good. And luckily, as a first sergeant, I was pretty well connected to the Family Readiness Center and the TAP folks. And so I went in and go, hey, look at my resume. And they're like, all right, first sergeant, start all over. So this is not good. This is not going to get you hired. So I learned some great advice there. They take ownership of your resume, find resources that help you write that resume, but also find somebody who's going to give you honest and open feedback that is not emotionally or professionally connected to you. And I use that. I started interviewing probably way too early. So I my first interview was like 7 months out. Wow. And I started getting offers. But I was pretty selective. And then in January, so I started terminal leave on April 1st, and in mid-January I got a call from UPS, and I really wanted to live in the South. UPS's corporate headquarters. We have 3 corporate headquarters in Atlanta, and the first job they contacted me for just wasn't a great fit. It is a majority of jobs at UPS, a vast majority are part-time, and they were looking for me to be a part-time load planner. And luckily, I had a great recruiter, and I sat down and said, "Hey, I'm looking at this for my next career. I spent 20 years in the Air Force. I want to spend 20 or 30 years at UPS, and I've got a lot to offer, and and I would love to work in corporate." So they ended up finding a great job for me, and I went through a pretty intense interview process. So I think I had 3 screenings and phone interviews. And I came down. It was funny. This is a great story. In fact, I'll skip ahead because you asked me to tell a funny story at the end. So I'll tell my funny story now. Okay. So, my last phone interview was on a Wednesday, and that phone interview went really, really well. And I followed up on Wednesday nights, and I basically said, "Hey, I'm just in Goldsboro, North Carolina. It's a 6-hour drive. I can be down there on a moment's notice to do an in-person interview." So I go to work on Thursday, and I end up getting a call from my wife at like 1 p.m. And she goes, "Hey, UPS left a message on your machine. They actually want you in Atlanta tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. to do an interview and test, and because we have management test." And I said, "Okay, I've got it covered." So my commander, I had a great commander, so ended up watching him pin on Colonel later on, years after I retired, and then recently it was at his retirement ceremony. Okay. So he was cool. He was like, "No problem, Shirt. Do what you need to do." And so I ran home and tried to read up a little bit more on UPS and get everything together, and rented a car and packed my suit and headed down to Atlanta. So I get down to Atlanta about 1 o'clock in the morning. So I check into a hotel, I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and okay, hey, I need to find where I'm going, and I'm going to be there early, and they make sure I look great in my suit. And I went to go put on my suit, and it didn't fit. No. I actually grabbed my oldest son's suit. So the big problem with I'm 6'1", I was probably 220 at the time. He was 5'5" and wrestling 120 pounds. So I went through every emotional stage at the time, from wanting to cry, to wanting to quit, to being mad, to then saying, "Hey, I can do this." Right. Yeah. So I ran to the lobby and I said, "I need a suit now. Do you have a suit?" Sure. the guy barely spoke any English, and he pointed his finger and said Walmart. And wow. And at the time, I was living in Goldsboro, North Carolina, which didn't have any suits at Walmart. And right. I'm thinking, I'll get a pair of dress pants and a shirt. So I run down there, and Alpharetta, Georgia, where I work at, is much different. I walk in and there's suits at the front of the store. So I buy a suit at the front of the store, and the funny thing is I ended up keeping that cheap suit for about 8 years. I had a hard time letting it go, and I showed up at UPS, and I ended up getting this, like, hey, the stressful part's over. I just had a very stressful event, and so they can't throw anything at me that's going to stress me anymore. Right. And I nailed it it was a long interview. It was probably 90 minutes. And I ended up telling them that story, because they asked, how do you overcome a challenge? And I was like, hey, I can tell you about a challenge I overcame this morning. Yeah. And they're like, oh, you could have just showed up in jeans. I'm like, would you have hired me? Yeah. And they were like, no, probably not. So that went well. I came home. They offered me the job the next week, and amazingly, they did right by me. They held the job until I started terminal. So I had a great transition. I had my retirement ceremony on a Friday, and I packed up my truck and started UPS on a Monday.
Outstanding. And you've been there ever since.
So I have. I've been there ever since. I just crossed over the 11-year point. I really got into a very good position. I started UPS as a manager, which rarely happens, but I can honestly tell you, I started making less money than I did in the Air Force. Really? And I very arrogantly thought, I'll make the money, I'll get promoted. And, and that happened. So it happened for a couple things. I had, my commander at the time always told me, success is a matter of several factors, good timing, good boss, good luck, and good performance. And the only one you can control is good performance. Right. And, I certainly controlled that. I made some good decisions. I hired some great people, and all of those other factors fell into place. And I got promoted 3 times in about a 4.5-year period. Wow. And became, very, very successul with it. And at UPS, I'm a director at our global freight forwarding business unit. I work out of the UPS Supply Chain Solutions corporate headquarters, and so I oversee our government operations. I don't move packages or letters, so I move big stuff. So anywhere from 151 pounds to the entire airplane's full. I can charter airplanes. I've moved several thousand MRAPs over the last 11 years. MRAPs, MATVs, and Humvees. So we do a lot of that. And last year, I got the opportunity, as EPS always does, when you start to feel comfortable with the position, they give you a little bit more responsibility. Yeah. So now I oversee a internal customer response team that's based at our hub in Louisville, Kentucky. And I also have a commercial product that we call Trade Direct that I oversee.
That's awesome. So you defied a couple things. So I guess the average, right? So I was reading somewhere and then I've heard it. So I guess it's true, right? So the average is the first job that most veterans on average is 13 months. They'll move on to something else after about 13 months. And whether that's for not a cultural fit, or they get a better offer somewhere else, or they didn't know what they wanted to be when they grew up, and then they finally found something different. So they kind of, find their way on. So you actually went past through that 11 years. That's awesome. The other thing that I find to be interesting, and I just want to go back to the interview process, is you personalized it. When I asked you adversity, you spoke about something that had just happened. You're very open and honest and transparent. I've learned a lot over the course of the last few months, really, just about the interview process. And those things are some of the key points that they talk about, is just being open, with the conversation. I think that's something that, as people are transitioning, we might have had some interviews in the military, and I get it. You do. I mean, they happen, right? For a first arm position or for whatever it may be. But jobs are a little different. And the outside world, I think we all know how to talk to military folks. When you're in the military, you talk military, and there's jargon, there's different terms, and they like being direct. And when you get outside of that, it's a little different when you start approaching that aspect of it from the interview prospect or perspective. I think it was really interesting that you told, that story. I think, and it is funny. And I want you to tell me another one at the end. No, it's good. It was perfect. So what I do want you to tell me is this. So I've got an opportunity to read some of your posts over the past 8 months on LinkedIn, and I've got to see things, and I'll check it out, and I'll hit like here and there, and I'll share it because there's tons of value that you put out there on LinkedIn. So I want people to follow. I'm gonna try to have everybody connect with you on LinkedIn, because honestly, especially for transition and veterans and just professionals in general. But the one thing I had noticed on there, you had made mention of an award you received, and I wanted to highlight that because of the significance of it when I read through it. Right, it was the UPS Jim Casey Community Service Award, and I don't know anything about awards in the civilian world. I don't even know a lot about awards in the Air Force world, because Air Force, you all have awards every day.
For everything.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Cy John Award and this award and that award. I'm like, wow. But the Jim Casey Community Service Award is awarded to one person out of 434,000 people. One person gets that award, and it was you. So tell me a little bit about, I want to know how it was that you, out of 434,000 people, got that award.
Wow. So that's a big question. I'm blessed. So for those of you who don't know about UPS, Jim Casey was our founder. So almost 111 years ago, we were founded, and UPS has always been about our community, right? If you think about UPS, we have an impact in every street in America, right? We're a very, very large footprint in the United States, North America, and globally, and really believe in community service. And 24 years ago, we decided to make the highest award we give, and we don't give many awards. We honestly don't give many awards, to make it a community service award and to name it after our founder. And the UPS Foundation, which is our charitable arm, and actually gives the award. And I was always amazed at the people who won it every year. And I was like, wow. And that was so cool that they do that. Then the company recognizes them. And the award is given every year at our management conference, which is when we get our 150 highest ranking people. So our 150 four-star generals in a room together for 3 days. And it's kind of one of the highlights of that 3 days is to hand out this award. So, I never went about, winning any awards. I started the very first Veterans Business Resource Group for UPS in Atlanta, and it's an employee affinity group for veterans. And from there, it rolled into Atlanta, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a little bit. And I just started having bigger impact, and that impact ended up crossing over into Atlanta, and I'm sorry, in the UPS, and it aligned well with what our foundation does. It aligned well with the values and at UPS, and it had a big impact in our community and for UPS and kind of what they look for in that award. So the award is you basically submit a package. My package was probably about 15 pages long, and it was solely on what impact that Atlanta had over the last year. And They do a judging. They use, from what I understand, 23 judges that narrow it down. It's blind judging, so they don't even know who the winner was at the end.
Oh, wow.
And then the UPS Foundation selects the winner. They narrow it down to the 12 business unit winners globally. And if you I figured I would eventually be make the top 12 or top 15. Never expected to win it, but when they announced the top 12, I looked at it and was like, wow, that's really cool. I'm not even going to be in the top 5, right? So it was cool to be honored, and it'll be a one-time thing, but I'll never win. And and then they told me about 7 weeks before the award that I had won, and I couldn't tell anybody but my wife. Because UPS keeps it a big secret. They don't formally announce it until the management committee conference. So most of the people on our board of directors and our management committee didn't know I had won. The president of my business unit didn't know I won. and they tell you early because they do this big production, and it's a great video. I have the videos posted on my LinkedIn account, and they spend quite a bit of effort to do a 5-minute video that they release at our management conference, It was a unique experience. I found out I never want to be a reality star because I got really tired of the video crews following me around. And the interesting thing was they flew my wife and I up to Toronto where the conference was this year, and we stayed at a different hotel because we got there the day before, and it was a secret, so nobody could know I was there. And they snuck me to the hotel and on stage to do a practice. And I hadn't seen the video because they kept the video a secret from me too. And so I practiced my speech, and my speech went great. But when I saw the video for the first time, it was really, really, really moving. And I was done watching it, and I was in tears. So I had to actually walk off the stage. Mm-hmm. out the back of the stage, and try to recompose myself. Yeah. And I left my wife and the president of the foundation in the front row. And I came back about 10 minutes later and thanked the people that did the video. And then I had a very restless night because I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to go through this tomorrow, right? I know I can hit a home run in a speech because I give speech as well, but I can't get that emotional. So I thought about it the next day, and I didn't watch the video when they were doing it live. I didn't listen to the introduction. I put my headphones in. I turned my back to the stage, and and it was like being back in high school wrestling, right? The music stopped. I ripped my headphones out and marched on the stage and gave a pretty powerful speech.
Awesome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that video and I'm going to put it on my Facebook page on my group. I have a group on the other side, Leadership After Transition Facebook group. I'll put it on there for the folks that want to check it out because I did see it, and to be honest with you, it was moving. I could imagine. So congratulations. That is an amazing accomplishment, and so that would lead us into a good transition into Vetlanta. But before I get into Vetlanta and ask you about how it started and what it does and let you explain it, because it is a great program, I do want to ask you, so you spoke about your college degrees. You spoke about the lack of desire to go to college while you're in for a bit. Very much similar to me, just so you know. But besides, I think we all know, and if there's people that I guess don't, right? That there are significant qualifications you must have to get a job, right? Like a college degree. If the requirement says a bachelor's degree, it's a requirement. You have to have a bachelor's degree. So out of bachelor's degrees or degrees in general, certifications, there are some significant leadership qualities that organizations look for, and I think maybe expect from a veteran. Could you explain to me, just from your perspective, what some of those may be?
Yeah, sure. So the first and foremost is, if you're interested in going to work for somebody, find out what their requirements are, right? And don't get mad if you don't agree with the requirements, right? I've had a fair share. UPS has a strong promote from within culture, and we have a strong education culture, right? And you can agree or disagree with it all you want. It's our culture. It might change, but it's been that way it is changing, but it's been that way for 110 years, right? Mm-hmm. So if you disagree with it, sorry, but it is what it is. So if you're really interested, meet those requirements. So at UPS, we have a degree requirement for almost 100% of our jobs at supervisor or higher level, a 4-year degree requirement. So that's an absolute must. You have to have that. And then other jobs will require certain certifications, right? And it can be widely different. So we talk about green belt and black belt, and how some employers mandate that. UPS, we don't mandate any kind of green belt or black belt, because we're going to come in and we're going to teach you how to do the job, right? So, occasionally a job at UPS will require a PMP certification. Yep. If you're a mechanic, that's going to be an airplane mechanic. That's going to require certification. If you're an auto mechanic, you have to have your own tools.
Yeah.
And so by the way, we're hiring a lot of auto mechanics. So if you have your own tools, look us up. And then it's figuring out those requirements. And then if you're short of those requirements, work out a plan to meet those requirements.
Okay. And then, so if the requirements are met, right, and then you have people that come and speak to you, and they look, what leadership qualities do you look for in these guys? Like, just the quality itself. I mean, I think that we're expected to have a sort of something, right? We've learned something, whether we serve for 2, 4, 6, 12, 20, or 30 years. Mm-hmm. There's something that the military creates or teaches. What some of the qualities do you see from our veteran community that come out that are positive? Because some are looked at as negative. They might not be so much qualities out there in that world.
Well, I think generally the population looks very positively the military and veterans, and sometimes too much. And I got to tell people, hey, 100% of the veterans that you interview aren't going to be great, solid, upstanding citizens, right? So generally most of them will, but occasionally you're going to get somebody who's not. So just don't see that they're a veteran, they're automatically going to be the highest caliber. Most of us are. So but there's some of us are not. So, use your judgment like you would anywhere else. I'm a hiring manager. I've hired, over my 11 years at UPS, I've hired dozens and dozens of people, lots of veterans. Probably about 50% of my hires are veterans. And by the time I get to interviewing somebody, they're already qualified for the position, right? Because I'll post a job and I'll get 500 people that apply for that job. Mm-hmm. And then I'll narrow it down. So actually HR, our talent acquisition, will narrow that down for me, and then I'll narrow it down even further. And so I'll take the top 6 or 8 and interviewing them, and they're already qualified for the job, right? Because they meet the minimum requirements. But what I'm looking at is that they're trainable to what I'm going to train them on. I'm looking that they're going to be a good fit for the team, and that they're going to be able to get along with everybody. I'm looking to make sure they're going to be able to fit into UPS culture, because you mentioned earlier that the average veteran transitions to another job within 13 months. That's absolutely not what I want to happen, right? So I'm going to make sure that they know the UPS culture, because our culture is, for the military, our culture is easy because it's really similar to the military at times. Right. That, and it's very expensive to train somebody, right? And it takes a lot of staffing hours to train somebody, and I don't want somebody turning over a year or two. And so I want them to come to UPS as their next career. Yeah. And so I'm looking at that. Then I start, I'm hiring people at a step below supervisor. Mm. So I'm gonna make sure that they have leadership skills, right? But I'm looking more that they have followership skills, that they have they can do the job in front of them, and that I can mold them into UPS leaders. And I've got this. I've got I've one of my jobs I pride is growing people and getting my people promoted. So if you look back 11 years, I've had dozens and dozens of people that I've hired that have gone on from specialist to supervisor. I've got several that have gone on to manager. So leadership skills are important. But all those other soft skills, being able to show up on time, being able to follow directions, being loyal is big to me, being a team player, communicating is very, very important. I need to be able to somebody to in a staff meeting, to be able to like, be comfortable with talking to directors and vice presidents, and somebody who's always ready for that tap on the shoulder for additional responsibility.
Outstanding. So I got to tell you, for the listeners out there, I got to say this. So you heard it from UPS. Last night I spoke to a hiring manager from Amazon, and I spoke to a hiring manager from PwC, PricewaterhouseCooper, and they all said the same thing: a fit in the company, the cultural fit. Are they going to get along? And although you might meet all the requirements, don't be upset if you don't get the job. It just means that you could have been stellar, but you just didn't fit into the culture that they had, because it's about a team. And I think that's really interesting that you had made mention, because I got to be honest with you, Lloyd, I never heard that, and that might be something kind of weird, right? But I've been out now for about a year. As a matter of fact, April 28th, I did my retirement ceremony. So in 2 days from now, I will have been out for a year. And it took me until yesterday and today to hear it 3 times that it's about cultural fit. And that's, I mean, the good thing for me is I'm employed, right? And I'm working on my business and the podcast. And so it's important for transition veterans to understand that there is that need to fit within that culture. So that's really great. So now we're going to get into why I was a cyber stalker on Lloyd Knight. So in my quest, while I was doing my podcast and trying to learn everything I could about transition, I realized that I wasn't a Tampa-based person. Well, I am Tampa-based, but I'm going all over the world. I want to find the best programs around. I want to find the best people to tell me about the best programs, so I can get the word out to have people have a great transition story, but more importantly, the resources and knowledge that are needed in that transition. And I come across this guy named Lloyd Knight on LinkedIn, because I've seen some posts, and they're talking about this organization called Vetlanta. And so what do? Computers are great. I went online. I www.vetlanta.org, which I'm going to put up on the screen so anybody watching can take a look at vetlanta.org as it comes up. But all of a sudden I see all these things. It talks about the 6 pillars. It's an about us. It's so informative just on the home screen for the organization. And then I look at who is the president, and it's Lloyd Knight. So let me reach out to Lloyd, and I did. So what I'd like from you is to tell me what was the vision with Vetlanta when it first started? How did it become real? And then we'll talk about what it actually does and how significant of a
Veterans Business Resource Group at UPS in Atlanta. And that was about 6 years ago. And I ran that I was elected for 2 one-year stints, and that was great. And we were really looking at connecting with veterans internal to UPS. We were looking at getting more veterans hired at UPS, and then veteran recognition. And right about the end of my second year, at the Veterans Business Resource Group, I get a call from this former Marine, David Wademaker. And David was working at the time for this guy named John Phillips, who now is the vice president of Atlanta. And, John's a retired Army officer and was heavily involved in the Coca-Cola Veterans Program for, 2 decades. And Coca-Cola has an amazing veterans program, an amazing Veterans Day week that they do at the corporate headquarters every year. And basically, John directed David to contact all the Fortune 100 companies in Atlanta to find out what they were doing for veterans. Because at the time, he goes, I think Coca-Cola is the only one really doing anything significantly. And so we had that very first meeting at Coca-Cola, and I think we probably had 15 people show up, maybe from about 8 to 10 different organizations. And what we found out was, man, Atlanta's wonderful, right? All our companies are doing amazing things, both nationally and locally, for veterans. And we're doing some of the same things. But what was missing was, the first was collaboration. None of us were talking to each other. Most of the nonprofits don't even talk to each other, right? Because they're competing for the same dollar. And so the collaboration was missing. And at the time, honestly, in the very first meeting, I didn't say much. I sat and observed. And the first thing I was thinking was, wow, scalability, right? Because at UPS, which is, I'm sure it's the same in the Army and the Air Force and a lot of organizations, you always have the same 2 or 3 people volunteering, right? And so we were doing a lot for the UPS Veterans Business Resource Groups, but they were small. Big efforts by 2 or 3 or 4 people, but they were having small scale impact. So I thought, wow, if I can get 3 people at UPS, 3 people at Coke, 3 at Home Depot, 3 at AT&T, 3 at GE, 3 at McKesson, 3 at Delta Airlines. Wow, we can do big things.
Yeah.
And that very first meeting was so good, we decided to have a second meeting. And in the second meeting, we talked about what would eventually become the foundation of Atlanta, and that is honest and open dialogue. What's working for veterans, what's not. Mm-hmm. Who is doing good for veterans, who is not. We talked a little bit about in the earlier discussion about the good and the bad and the ugly, and that's kind of a speech I give about the veteran nonprofit space. You have a lot of great organizations doing great, amazing things for veterans, and then you have some that are bad, and they're bad because they're too focused on fundraising, right? While they do some good things for some veterans, a majority of their effort is to raise that next dollar. Mm-hmm. And then you have bad ones that hey, the people come up with a great idea, right? And their heart and soul is pure. They just don't have the business sense or the leadership managerial sense to make it impactful for veterans. And then you have the ugly, and the uglies are the fraudsters and scammers and schemers out there. And we quickly figured out the more we can have honest and open dialogue about who the good, the bad, and ugly are, the better veterans are going to be served. And then we decided to have a third meeting and a fourth and a fifth. And it was so good, we decided, you know what, let's make this permanent, right? We all have veterans business resource groups. Let's make a Atlanta-wide business resource group for veterans. And luckily we didn't choose that as our name. So and we had, that was probably the hardest thing we did, was finding a name, and we ended up with a great one, Vetlanta. And then our logo, if you look at our logo was designed by John Walter Thompson. And John Walter Thompson, you being a Marine, you probably know who they are. So they've done the advertising for the U.S. Marine Corps for over 70 years. Mm-hmm. And for the first, I think it was 39 years, they did it for free. Yeah. And Congress passed the act that made them start charging for it. And so they were one of the very many groups that saw the value of what we were doing and designed a pretty incredible logo. And then we met with a lot of early morning 6 o'clock breakfast meetings with people like you that are passionate, right? And but it was taking that passion and trying to figure out how to form ourselves. And we talked with a lot of lawyers. We have a great pro bono lawyer that helps guide us. And we came to the conclusion that we're just going to be a club, and we want to just be a club. And we formed as a club instead of an LLC or a 501c3 for a bunch of different reasons. The first was we didn't want to ask for money from our companies or our foundations and take money away from the nonprofits that were out there. Right. And we didn't want to, if our foundations were given $10,000 to a nonprofit that it was having impact, we shouldn't change that to $5,000 to take $5,000 to run our admin. That's absolutely what we didn't want to do. And the second one was we wanted to change the message, right? Because if you're a veteran lead in a Fortune 500 company, you are wore out from organizations asking for money. Right. And they I get asked for money all the time, and sometimes it's in the initial conversation. Hey, glad to meet you. We do wonderful things about veterans. Can I have $100,000? And I'm like, I don't know you. So we were tired of that. So we wanted to kind of flip the script, and then and we're like, hey, let's try to do this without any money. So we chartered ourselves, and in our charter, it specifically says we will not raise any money, we will not accept any money, we will not give any money. And and then we opened it up to anybody who wanted to help veterans. We were like, hey, if we keep this to Fortune 100, 500 companies, we're going to have limited engagement. So let's open it up to academia, nonprofits, volunteers, business of all sizes. And then we started having quarterly summits. and these things rapidly grew, and the message on being focused on helping veterans, on not being focused on money, was extremely popular. And one of our missions is to make Atlanta the top destination for veterans. Nothing against Tampa, but
I'm on my way. We're gonna.
we think Atlanta's where it's at, so we started growing rapidly, and here we are 4 years later. We have 400 people now that show up at our quarterly summits. Yeah. We have over 2,000 members that have registered to be a part of Atlanta, and we've been able to do it. We have sponsors that sponsor our events, and by sponsors we mean they provide a facility and provide snacks or dinner when we have a summit. But we haven't taken a dime of anybody's money. And I think that continues to be extremely popular. And then two years ago, we decided, hey, we need to start measuring impact, right, and aligning impact. Here we are, we're very popular. At the time, we probably had 800 members and probably 200 people showing up at the summits. But we need to be very deliberate on our services that we have, right? We can't just be a networking group. So we formed the 6 pillars of Atlanta, and we aligned an executive sponsor for each of those pillars, and then a pillar director, and then volunteers underneath each of those pillars. So they basically act as 6 clubs within the club. And so the 6 pillars are, the first one is employment. Because if you give a veteran or a spouse a job, it's going to mitigate issues in the other areas, right? So employment is kind of why we formed, and kind of always our number one priority. And the second one was healthcare. Healthcare is very, very important, and probably one of the least connected groups in Atlanta. We have some wonderful resources. We have in Atlanta that not everybody was hearing about. And these are free resources, and several of the resources don't even take government money. We have the Share Initiative at the Shepherd Center and Embry's Veterans Program, so we developed the healthcare pillar. The third one is education, which you're part of 4 Block, and 4 Block is very closely connected with in Atlanta. The next one was business, to help people interested in starting a business, help them connect with our companies, because we all have supplier diversity programs, and then to help them find the right resources out there. And that's really important for honest and open dialogue, because that pillar is just rampant with scammers and schemers, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so it's, it's helping out with that. The next one is a community. So, help them find those community resources out there. Team Red, White, and Blue, Team Rubicon. Those some of the most popular ones we're connected with. Travis Manion Foundation, which does some amazing work. And then the last one is housing. And if you look at the video, we talk about the Veterans Empowerment Organization, and that is one that became very near and dear to our heart. And we didn't know much about it. It turns out they're the biggest dedicated homeless veteran shelter in Atlanta. And started by an immigrant, and that wasn't a veteran, and does amazing things that nobody knew they were there. And so we were able to connect up with there and provide housing assistance. But housing goes more than that. So if you're a veteran, you probably get 10 letters a day from different people wanting to give you a home loan, right? So we want to have that open and honest dialogue on who's good in that space and who's bad in that space, and where you can get education if you're buying a house for the first time. We want to provide resources. A lot of veterans, Vietnam veterans, are getting very old, and their homes are falling apart around them. Mm-hmm. So we want to provide resources that can come in and help them, do some upgrades to their housing. So those are the 6 pillars of Atlanta, and it's how we deliver impact.
I'm amazed. So again, the website doesn't know justice. What you need to do is you have to do this and put what you just said on your website, so people it'll be a virtual website where you can talk about it. And I say that because, honest to God, I knew all 6 pillars existed. I read them, and like I said, I've gone to your website a bunch of times. But to hear you actually describe each pillar and what its meaning is, it's significant. The community one, I mean, I thought about 5 pillars just here in Tampa, thinking about a bunch of different ways to start different programs. And I thought about 5, and you put in community. That's one in which I eliminated, or I didn't eliminate, I never thought of. But when I looked at it, and then I listened to you explain it, how important it is because there are a lot of resources in the community. We have Team Red, White, and Blue down here as well, and again, a bunch of other good ones that are around that truly want to make difference in the Tampa area. So I think it's phenomenal. I'm gonna go back just a moment. One, I want to make sure if anybody wanted to reach out to Lloyd Knight, how could they get a hold of you?
LinkedIn, and I'm really responsive on LinkedIn. So send me a message. I'll respond back to you. So I'll connect with anybody. So send me a message. I invite you to sign up for vetlanta.org for our email list. If you sign up for our email list, you'll get it. We have a monthly newsletter, and you'll get invites to all our summits. Speaking of summits, our next one is going to be on August 7th. I'd like to invite all your viewers to come down, and that's going to be at UPS corporate headquarters. We think we're going to have a pretty phenomenal event, and it's going to be focused on the community pillar. And if you've never been to UPS headquarters, it's pretty wonderful.
Well, I'm going to be there for multiple reasons. 1, to be at UPS headquarters. 2, to be in Atlanta, and 3, because I think that if I don't support Vetlanta, then I'm not doing the right thing, because I love your mission. I love what you're doing, and I don't care that it's not in Tampa. I'll drive 7 hours. It's not that bad, right? But I would tell you, there's a couple of things that I loved about just the idea of Atlanta, how it started. I think it's great. I think that a couple guys that have a vision that just understand what they want to do, and you kind of take a risk. I love the fact that you do it for no money, no in, no out. That's where you can tell how real it is. That's where I've struggled over the past year with conversations, because a lot of times, I'm a visionary. I might not be the smartest guy in the room, but I'm trying to see things, and I want them to become real. And a lot of times when I'm having conversations, I'm quickly turned off, because within 30 seconds of that conversation, it's, well, you can make a profit or we can do this, or how do you monetize that? And to me, from the veteran space, I'm not trying to monetize it. If ever it was to be monetized, okay, so be it. Maybe that's progression, or maybe that's something else. Maybe it just happens. But the idea of going out and doing and giving back to a community that gave so much to me. The bottom line is, I, like you, was a D student. I had a couple F's in there too. I wasn't going to be an academic. That wasn't my calling. So when I came in, the Army gave me, I gave them time. They gave me everything. Right. So I want to give back to the community that helped me so much. But I did want to make mention of something kind of you were talking about in the good, bad, and ugly. You had put out something on LinkedIn as well, and I got it in a networking group that I'm part of. David Osborne, or Ozzy, had sent it out, and it's U.S. Veterans Organizations by the Numbers by GuideStar. That's something that I found to be very interesting when I read it. I looked through it. It's got statistics and things, and you speak very much on what you actually talked about, and it just shows some pretty good information. So I'm also going to put that link on my Facebook page so people can look at that, because believe it or not, there's a lot of folks that want to give to veterans organizations. So when you put the word veteran in it, it obviously means that it's a good organization, right? And so people just throw their money blindly, right?
So and I'll give you the spill I gave on the post. So don't give a second of your time, don't give a penny of your money unless you do homework on that organization, right? Because there's so many bad and ugly ones out there, right? So there is great resources available. The first is your community. Ask around, right? Mm-hmm. So the community of veterans will tell you who's good or bad. Right. So and the next one is GuideStar, Charity Navigator, social media, and do your homework before you give any money or time.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and this is going to be a long one, right? No, I'm kidding. It's not. So as we have our service members that are transitioning into new things, if you had an opportunity to talk to every single one of them and you got to give them one piece of advice that's just going to really help them through the process of going from the uniform to the civilian world, what would that one piece of advice be?
Wow, one piece of advice. I wish it was that easy.
Yeah, right.
Build an external network. So veterans are great at building internal networks. We're veterans, right? So we're able to connect with other veterans, but we are bad at taking a step out of our comfort zones and making connections with people who have nothing to do with the military. And I can tell you, getting hired a lot of times is finding the right opportunity and finding out about a culture of an organization or getting an introduction. So it's take a step out of your comfort zone long before you get out of the military, right? Start developing that external network, have your elevator speech. Don't wait till you go to 4 block, right? Have your elevator speech already situated, and give it, and then start building your external network. Come out to organizations, like the U.S. Chamber, like Vetlanta, and start building those connections and using those connections. LinkedIn is really important, right? LinkedIn is an invaluable tool. So I've connected, I've helped so many veterans out purely through what I do in LinkedIn, probably more than I've ever helped out in person, honestly. And I help out a lot of people in person as well.
What I really find to be interesting about LinkedIn, and I mean, obviously there's rules, right? It's not Facebook. And what I've done, and I don't know if it's the right answer, and I've talked to several folks, but I might not be the best LinkedIn teacher, but what I've found with LinkedIn is that if I request to connect with you, I do it with a note, right? And as that note goes out, I wait for a response, and that's good. And usually that's how it works, right? But I take it a step further. I don't want a note. Like, I mean, I want it to begin with, but then I ask within the first, as soon as I have time, I ask for, hey, do you have 15 minutes or 10 minutes to have a conversation? Let me know. And then if there's a response and we can work out a time, I get on the phone. If there's not a response, I eliminate the person from my network. And that probably isn't the best thing, but I'm not into LinkedIn for Facebook reasons, meaning that Facebook's good for friends and family, and you can catch up every so often and see. But I really want my LinkedIn stuff to be a meaningful connection. I want it to be business oriented. I mean, to be honest with you, I think I probably have smaller numbers in the Tampa area that I'm linked in with, as opposed to the ones that are outside. I have people that that cover all corners of the states and overseas as well, and I try to have actual meaningful relationships with them, because not so I can get something from it, which maybe I do. I mean, I guess that's what's good about connections in general, is maybe I do get something from you. But if I offer something to you, can I offer something? And that's what I'm looking for. And I'm looking for those relationships so we can build off each other. And if I can connect you, then I want to connect you. And that's where I find myself. I'm the dot connector in a sense, right? Without connecting dots, right? But that's what I enjoy doing. But I love all that advice is good. And I bet you if I had the opportunity to sit here and say, let's talk for another hour, you could spend the next hour giving advice, because there is so much. It's sort of like John Maxwell's 21 laws of leadership, right? You got 21 laws. I didn't know. I thought it was just one. Be a good leader, right?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we definitely have to have another one of these, and we can focus it solely on transition advice. Oh,
that'd be awesome. I would love to. So I would tell you, Lloyd, I want to say thank you. We have a old friend of mine that's on, and I can't. Hey, Mervin, it's Goose. It's a friend of mine. We were in Korea now. He's been watching. He's been putting comments up and asking questions. I don't want to. I'd like to ask questions, but maybe for the next time we come on, I'll have a more of a Q&A session with folks, only because it would go much longer than the desired effect, or maybe I can answer some of the questions for him. But Goose and I go back to Korea in 1999. So he and I have been friends for, 20 years almost, real soon. And he did. I did want to ask you one question that he asked, because it was a while back. But what he had asked you was, I just got to scroll down, and I apologize. But he said, how many is in your circle, and how did you decide who was real and who wasn't?
Wow. So the circle, I have a I have a big circle and I have a smaller, much smaller inner circle, right? So it's, you can't build trust overnight, right? So the really the Vetlanta circle of trust, if I'm going to go that, those relationships took time, they took efforts, and they took trial and error, right? Some people made it in the circle and found out they were in it for the wrong reasons and accident, I'm a pretty good people person being a first sergeant. So I can judge people really, really quite well. Yep. And then it's then it's determining what that relationship should be.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much. He wanted me to tell you, thank you for sharing your strengths and your stories and taking the time. He's actually been on the whole time listening. So that's great. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll stay in touch. I will see you August 7th, if not before. I will be up there. My wife and I are planning on taking a drive up because a former commander of mine opened up a Chick-fil-A in the city of Atlanta, and we figure we'll take a 7-hour drive to Chick-fil-A. I mean, there's two of them like right on the way, like here close, but we want to pay a visit. So while I'm there, I'll see if there's time, and if you're there, we'll shake hands then. If not, August 7th, we most certainly will. So I thank you for your time. Truly, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
All right, good deal. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you stopping by, and we'll see you next time on the other side.